Several weeks later, after we'd already come back to classes after 9/11, I was working as a work study in the music department, so he came in to register for private guitar lessons. He always carried his guitar with him everywhere he went. And we had a nice conversation. He remembered me from our program meeting. We had a little chat, exchanged pleasantries, and he gave me his form. And as I went to register him for these private lessons, I saw his name for the first time, which was Jordan. And at the time, Jordan Chandler's name wasn't widely known because in the U.S., alleged crimes of sex abuse, particularly when they're minors, are very protected. But I went online and I asked Jeeves, dating myself, and I suddenly realized that he was in fact the first accuser from 1993.
So Evan Chandler and June Chandler, or originally June Wan, had a child named Jordan Chandler who turns out to be the first alleged victim. June Chandler divorced Evan Chandler and married a man named David Schwartz. Charles, can you tell me about Evan Chandler?
So Evan Chandler was born in New York. He was actually born Evan Charmaz, but he wanted a career as a screenwriter, so he moved to California and changed his name from Charmaz to Chandler because he thought that Charmaz was too Jewish sounding. He became a dentist, but he didn't really enjoy it and also was not really very good at it. He was censured by the regulatory board for shoddy work. He was also accused at one point of sexually assaulting a female patient while he was working on her. He had a very kind of a brief career as a screenwriter. He got a screenwriting credit around 1993 on the film Robin Hood Men in Tights.
We're men in tights. We roam around the forest looking for lights.
Apparently he was working on Mel Brooks when he came up with the Men in Tights idea, or he said his son came up with the Men in Tights idea. This is the same 13-year-old boy. And apparently, maybe Mel was under some kind of ether anesthetic, but he decided it was a great idea and went along with the dentist, and they put the movie together. I would imagine a dentist to the stars would be exposed to a lot of the glamour in Hollywood. He can see his successful customers talking on the phone, making deals, and it looks so easy to someone on the outside, and he figured he wanted to get a little piece of the pie and get, stop drilling teeth and maybe become a producer and really make some big bucks.
So Michael Jackson is in Los Angeles with some of his team, and they're driving along Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills, and the car breaks down. There's a lady in the area who sees Michael Jackson stranded by the side of the road and calls her husband, who works at a business called Rent-A-Wreck, which is a car rental business. Rent-A-Wreck is owned by Dave Schwartz. So Dave Schwartz calls his wife June because he knows that Jordan Chandler, her son, is a massive Michael Jackson fan. There was one employee at Rent-A-Wreck who said that when June arrived, she was kind of forcing Geordie on Michael Jackson, almost like trying to emotionally blackmail him. So that's how the numbers got exchanged, and they ended up staying in touch.
So a friendship develops between Michael Jackson and the Chandler family, excluding Evan Chandler. During this period, Michael Jackson would have stayovers at their house. They would come over and sleep over at Michael Jackson's house. Where is Evan Chandler during this period of time?
Evan Chandler was pretty much an absent father. He owed almost $70,000 in unpaid child support. He had been rowing with June about how infrequently he was seeing his son. She was trying to get Evan to take Jordan more often, and he was refusing. He had his own new family, like June did. He'd remarried and had kids with another lady. And they were struggling to get Evan to engage with Geordie. It was not until he discovered that his son was now friends with Michael Jackson that he suddenly became interested in seeing him again.
My recollection was that he was not very interested in Geordie prior to the time that Geordie took up with Michael. And as soon as Geordie took up with Michael, Evan became the most interested parent in the world.
They seemed to be getting on quite well. Evan even at one point asked him to build an extra wing onto the house so he could come and stay more often. And then when that idea didn't work, he said, well, I've got a better idea. Why don't you just build me a new house? And then that didn't happen either. June dropped the bombshell that she and Geordie were thinking of going on tour with Michael, and then Evan, who previously had been an absent father and wasn't paying his child support and wasn't really interested in seeing his son at all all of a sudden became enraged about the idea that Geordie would be out of the country for a few months, and that was when the relationship really took a dramatic turn towards the negative. What had happened was Evan had begun making strange comments and threats to June and Dave and Geordie about Michael that he was going to make allegations. He was behaving so erratically that they feared he was going to do something crazy. So the next time they spoke to him on the phone, they tape recorded him.
This man is going to be humiliated beyond belief. He will not believe it. He will not believe what's going to happen. And beyond his worst nightmares, sell one more record. If I go through with this, I win big time. I will get everything I want. They will be destroyed forever. That's a fact, Dave. That's what's going to happen. Does that help? Michael's career will be over. Does that help, Jordan? Michael's career will be over. And does that help, Jordan? That's irrelevant to me.
He's talking about how he's furious that Michael has stopped phoning him and stopped taking his calls, and how Michael has stolen his ex-wife and torn the family apart, and how he's plotting his revenge. And he says that everything is moving in accordance with a plan that's not just mine. And this telephone conversation occurred before Geordie Chandler made any allegations against Michael Jackson. And in this phone call, Evan Chandler alludes to a nasty attorney.
This attorney I found, I interviewed several, and I picked the nastiest son of a bitch I could find. Once I make that phone call, this guy is just going to destroy everybody in sight. Any devious, nasty, cruel way that he can do it. And I've given him full authority to do that. It'll be a massacre if I don't get what I want.
And that attorney turns out to be Barry Rothman.
My name is Geraldine Hughes. I was the legal secretary in 1993 for Barry Rothman, who was the attorney of Evan Chandler, the first accuser that came against Michael on child molestation. I was working for him. He hired me, and I came in for an interview one day, and he hired me for the job as his legal secretary. I was the only legal secretary for him. He was really an entertainment attorney, and he had a history of being a good negotiator in the entertainment field, though. Whenever Evan would call Barry Rothman's office, Barry Rothman would tell us to put the call on hold, and he'd walk all the way back to his office, shut the door, and that's how he took all of Evan's calls. He was the only client he did that for. Anybody else call, if he was away from his office, he'd just pick up the phone and say, okay, woo, say what he had to say, and then he'd hang up. But he didn't do that with Evan. Evan was always behind closed doors.
Evan had already retained a lawyer. Geordie Chandler was insisting that Michael had never touched him. Anthony Pellicano, who is Michael's private investigator, goes around to interview Geordie Chandler and questions him for about an hour, I believe, and asks him all sorts of questions and very direct questions. Have you ever seen Michael Jackson naked? Have you ever been naked in a bed with Michael Jackson? Has he ever touched you? Etc., etc. And Geordie Chandler says no to everything. At the end of the conversation, Geordie Chandler reiterates that Michael has never done anything wrong to him and says that his dad is just trying to get money.
It started out a custody issue. Evan Chandler wanted the custody of Geordie because in order to coerce a child into saying something that's not true, you need time with that child.
Evan Chandler goes to custody court and says, I want to have a week of custody with my son. And June Chandler agrees on the basis that he'll be returned after 7 days.
And he never gave them back. He kept them. He never brought them back. And during that time that he had him, he came into my office and he was behind closed doors with my attorney. The Geordie Chandler was. I actually opened up the door one day. I was leaving and I opened up the door and Geordie was in the back. And he kind of looked a little startled because I looked and I saw him and I was like, nobody in the office knew that he was even there. We were like, how did he even get here? And I opened up the door. So I had a few encounters with Geordie Chandler coming into the office. And to me, it just looked like a coaching session.
While Geordie was in Evan's custody, Evan sedated him with a drug called sodium amytal. He did this supposedly so that he could perform a dental procedure, but it's a very dubious story that he's telling because there's no reason to use sodium amytal for a dental procedure. He gives him this drug which has a reputation in the 1980s as a truth serum. The problem is that sodium amytal is not a truth serum. In just around 1993, the evidence was beginning to emerge that in fact sodium amytal was the opposite of a truth serum. It made people highly suggestible. So by 2000s, Psychology Today and other journals were saying that it was completely false that sodium amytal had a reputation as a truth serum.
So I'm just going to take a step back for everyone. Evan Chandler makes a phone call to David Schwartz talking about how he is going to make allegations against Michael Jackson. Jordan Chandler subsequently denies all allegations. Evan Chandler then gets custody of Jordan Chandler and never returns him. It was only supposed to be for a week. And during this period that Evan Chandler had Jordan Chandler, there were numerous unethical methods that we know of being used against Jordan. Notably, the use of sodium amytal and the one-on-one coaching between Jordan Chandler and Barry Rothman. So by the end of Jordan's stay, he changes his story. He went into Evan's custody saying that he wasn't abused by Michael Jackson, to now claiming that, yes, in fact, I had been abused. So Charles, with this new shocking statement by Jordan Chandler, what are Evan Chandler's next moves?
So